Hello, welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be ranking Prog's greatest double albums. Now, as we all know, the progressive rock genre is a very opulent and grand genre, and in that you would expect some very epic albums to be produced, and there have been some, but not as many as you think. When I started to research this list, I found, especially from the classic prog era, there's not that many to look at. But there are some definite masterpieces here. In many cases, when prog does go for the double album, you often feel like the genre is overreaching itself. A double studio album is an incredible undertaking, and I think the classic album with two 20-minute sides is a wonderful package of music. You know, 40 minutes of music is a beautiful time span. It's not too long and it's not too short. It's like Goldilocks' breakfast is just right. And so every time a band tries to make a double studio album, they are pushing the limits of what the listener can take. And so there will always be a feeling, I think, that there's a lot of stuff to get through. It's a difficult listen. So I've taken that into account on this list. As you know me, I've tried to pull from the classic prog era from the 1970s, not totally, but I have, because I really think that that's, really defines the genre. You know, we're really in what we class as progressive rock, and also these are the innovative albums, and I always like to use innovation as a big marker of how I rank these videos. So that's a little bit of a proviso before we start on this list. I'll get straight in anyway, so let's see where we go. So at number 10, I've got Phaedra by Tangerine Dream. I think Tangerine Dream, it's debatable whether we fit them in to the progressive rock genre. I think they always seem to fit squarely in it to the general public. What they do is completely unlike Genesis or Pink Floyd. But I think Tangerine Dream's influence on music has not been stated enough. This is one of the great electronic music groups of all time, a pioneer of ambient electronic experimental music, and a band that was able to make very difficult music and sell a lot of records, Phaedra being their high point in the mid-70s. I think this album is... It could have been any of their albums really that I picked. I think this one has come up because it's probably their most popular album, and it's the one that most people have listened to. So that's what I put at number 10, is Phaedra by Tangerine Dream. The other one that was contending for this position for me was Sing to God by Cardiacs, which I've been going on about so much on this channel. I thought we don't want another chat about the brilliance of that album, but those two are tying for me, you know, in 10th place. So anyway, at number 9, I have The Astonishing by Dream Theater. This is an absolutely monumental album, and aesthetically is successful on all counts, I think. Dream Theater had already made a double disc, so we're talking about, this is not a double album, this is a double disc. And they'd already made a double disc album with 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence a few years before, which is a contender for this list. I'm not greatly knowledgeable on Dream Theater, and they're not one of my favourite bands. I've gone back and had a listen to both of these albums, and I think The Astonishing just ranks a little bit higher for me because of the epic scale of this album. This is an album that has a story, you know, and I think, you know, prog musicians often go for the double album when they're trying to tell a story. And this idea of telling a story through music is an interesting one, you know, to try and create a plot, almost like a film. And you really feel that this album has taken its influence from much more contemporary storylines like Star Wars and Game of Thrones. It's very science fiction, very dystopian. The scale of this album is astonishing. You know, it's you've got choirs on here, you've got a string section on here, all orchestrated with music that runs all the way through, making this absolutely monumental album. it's an interesting one because I think this is the first album without Mike Portnoy. This is when Mike Mangini joined, and I don't know whether that they had something to prove with such a charismatic member leaving. You know, they really had to state their claims being the kings of prog, which I think they do here. And I don't know whether that gives it's an extra oomph, you know, to you know, just go the extra mile. It's an absolutely monumental prog album, and although it's a heavy listen, you know, we're talking about 2 CDs here full of music, not vinyl albums. I think they pull it off, and I think it deserves to be on this list. You know, I don't often put that much modern stuff on the list, but this from 2016 is only a few years back. That's like really recent for me, isn't it? So that's what I've got at number 9 is The Astonishing by Dream Theater. At number 8, I have got Third by Soft Machine. Right. Again, this is a band that I have difficulty with Soft Machine. They sort of emerge right at the beginnings of progressive rock, and they're, as most progressive rock bands at that time are, they're a psychedelic band, you know, a whimsical British psychedelic band. They start to bring in influences that are really, for me, coming from sort of improvised avant-garde, especially Frank Zappa. It's like they've got an ear to what Frank Zappa's doing on albums like Lumpy Gravy and Uncle Meat, Bert Weenie's Sandwich Weasels, Rip My Flesh, and Soft Machine at this point, when they make Third, it seems like a British version of Frank Zappa. I think the reason why I would put this on this list, and I haven't included Soft Machine on many lists, but their influence on progressive rock is undeniable, and the reason is because they are in the game so early on. They are real pioneers. I think, as I've discussed elsewhere, I think progressive rock is essentially a British genre. And so the groundwork is being laid for prog in England, in Britain at that time. And I think in 1970, when Soft Machine brought Third out, they were at the top of their game in terms of innovation. So this album is incredibly innovative in that, for example, this is probably the earliest double album on the list. Now, there's a proviso here, because I haven't obviously included live albums, and a lot of this stuff is live on this album, but I think it's just, this is new material that's been recorded live and then arranged into these great big epic tracks. Robert Wyatt, who was an absolute genius. I love Robert Wyatt's solo material. Robert Wyatt's influence on the songwriting and bringing in that sort of, you know, humorous Canterbury sort of subject matter, it's still there. This is before Soft Machine just turned into your sort of bog standard jazz fusion group, which is, but there's no criticism about, you know, I love jazz fusion, but I think later on, once they go instrumental, it's very hard to see where they stand in terms of innovation. They sound like another jazz fusion group, and the main interest is the fact that they're English and there aren't that many English jazz fusion groups, and the fact that they were able to put forward certain musicians, especially Alan Holdsworth. I think, you know, Alan's inclusion on Bundles sort of was for the world the first time we ever heard that genius. But going back to Third, I think the balance between the psychedelic, the avant-garde, the jazz improvisation and the whimsical English lyrical matter is just right here. And so I think just purely on innovation and importance to this genre, at number 8 I have Third by Soft Machine. Right, at number 7 I have Subterranea by IQ. Now I have to have a confession here. If you don't know, I was the drummer in IQ and I played on the album Frequency. I was the drummer from 2005 to 2009. So it might sound like a bit of favouritism putting this album on. When I was looking at other people's lists, this came up quite a lot. I think it's pretty much a masterpiece. It's definitely a neo-prog masterpiece. Again, predating The Astonishing by Dream Theater, this is also a sort of science fiction, dystopian story which tells this this story of this person that's been isolated in this room, they've never been able to leave, and then suddenly they get out and they try and find out why they've been put there. It's that type of story. This story is so strong and so well told on this album that there's actually been a feature film made of this story. It's absolutely incredible, in which IQ were involved in the creation of the soundtrack for that as well. It's IQ at their second peak, I think. You have the sort of classic neo-prog albums in the 80s, you know, like The Wake and Tales from the Lush Attic. Then you get their sort of signed to a major label period, which is Non Zamo, you know, and what's the other one called? Oh, never mind. And then they come back with Ever, which I think is their greatest album. And here there's so much confidence to take on a project like this by the band and be able to deliver it. And it does really have some of IQ's greatest tunes on there. And I think Narrow Margin is one of the greatest prog epics ever made. So that's what I've got. Sorry, I know I was in the band, but that's what I've got at number 6 is Subterranean by IQ. At number 5, I've got War of the Worlds, Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, which I've recently done a video on, and I was really pleased at the positive comments I got about this, because for me, growing up in Britain, this album was a huge album. So for those of you who don't know what this album is, because it seems that people in other parts of the world, it's not so well known. Jeff Wayne was a film composer. He wasn't like a pop artist or a rock artist. And they had this idea of telling the story of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds on a vinyl album. And this would be not like, say, Subterranean, where we've got separate songs that move through. This would be one great big piece that just runs through the whole album and tells this story with actors, including actors like Richard Burton, that would narrate the story, and there would be characters. It's got a full orchestra on it. It's about as prog as you can get. And it was made in that period when prog was supposed to be dead, in 1978, you know, after punk had come out. You know, prog's dead, it's had its way, and this album comes out in Britain and goes on to sell 13 million copies. It's a huge success. It's gone on to create like stage shows. There are like fun rides you can go on. It's just a huge thing, right? And for me, it really proves the power of progressive rock to and that power did not diminish after punk. There's 2 albums on here that really prove that case, and I think you know, War of the Worlds is one of those albums. When you put it on, it's absolutely an incredible musical journey. So well composed, so well played. Everything falls together. It's an absolute favourite of so many people, and people outside the progressive rock world. You know, this is a really loved album, and I think it's because the melodies are so strong. And this is something I think that really, as I do this more and more with progressive rock, when progressive rock is at its best, it's able to create incredible melodies, and there's some real hooky melodies, and the whole thing is delivered a lot of the time over quite a disco sounding rhythm section. And so that slight influence of disco on this album, I think, enabled portions of it to be released as singles, which are also hits. It's an absolutely anomaly in the history of progressive rock. I don't think it gets discussed enough. So it could well deserve to rank higher on the list. You know, it's just such a strange one to put on. But that's what I've got at number. What we got here, 10, 9, 8, 7, 7. So that's at number 6. Sorry, I lost my count. I always do that. So at number 6 we have War of the Worlds. At number 5 we also have one of the biggest selling albums of all time, which is The Wall by Pink Floyd. I'm not a fan of The Wall, right? My view of Pink Floyd has gone up doing this channel. They're such heavy hitters. They have done many incredible albums. You know, they're there right at the dawn of progressive rock with you know, with their debut album. You know, they're as experimental, if not more experimental, than Soft Machine. They're doing some incredible stuff like Atom Heart Mother with that first epic on side 1 is an incredible achievement. And then of course you have Dark Side of the Moon, Animals, you know, Wish You Were Here. I might have to do a video like I did on Rush, where there's people telling me Rush aren't prog, and I've now got people telling me that Pink Floyd aren't prog, which seems completely ridiculous to me. Whether The Wall is prog, I don't know. It's definitely prog in its epicness. I think this is really where Roger Waters is in complete control, and he wants to tell a story, and he tells a powerful story that's from the heart. Again, a dystopian story which really deals with, you know, celebrity and being at the centre of this world which puts so much emphasis on celebrity, I suppose. It's and I don't think that has been stated that strongly. For me, the actual music on there is much more sort of expansive rock music. It's prog that has been influenced by punk. I think, you know, Pink Floyd were able to adjust, and that's probably because they weren't a virtuoso prog band in the same way that sort of Yes are. And here, I think they do that very well. For me personally, I've never warmed to this album. When I first got into music in 1979, when I was 11 years old, Another Brick in the Wall was, you know, this huge #1 hit single. And so this was one of my first experiences of what progressive rock. Is it a progressive rock song? Anyway, I think if I didn't include it, I get criticised. I think if I do include it, I'll get criticised. I'm not a fan personally, so there's not much more I can say about this, except I'm one of those people that I know the album because it's just so huge. This is one of the biggest albums ever made, you know, that has begat stage shows, huge tours and a film, you know. And it's interesting, here now we have 2 progressive rock albums that have gone on to inspire a film, and I think this world of film coming into music, I think it happened in the 70s, because when you bought an album in the 1970s and you put it on in your living room, this was the closest thing you could get to watching a film and experiencing that big experience that you get when you go to see a film. And I think people were much more inclined to sit down and close their eyes and for their mental imagery to tell the story in front of them. And I think this is what made prog so important and so successful in the 1970s. The Wall can almost be seen as the peak of that. You know, I can't think of any album on this list that has created so much cultural influence. So most people of a certain age will know this album whether they like prog or not, you know. So anyway, that's what I have got at number 5. At number 4, I have Focus 3, right, from 1972 or 1973, I'm not too sure, you know, but this is Focus at the peak of their powers. One of the greatest progressive rock bands of all time, and this really is one of the greatest progressive rock albums. It doesn't tell a story, it's a double album because they just have so much incredible material this time. They have so much to say. I think of the albums on this list, this is probably the best, most concise double album in terms of a listening experience. You don't feel like you're having to trawl through this album, which is some of them on the list, I think that is the case. The opener on that album, which I can't quite remember the title of now, I'm sure you'll remind me in the comments, that is the definitive prog track. If you wanted to play someone what is prog, you could play in that track, and the interplay in between Jan Akkerman and Thijs van Leer, those solos, this is also a jazz fusion album. Focus's style is a mixture of jazz fusion, jazz improvisation, classically influenced rock music, especially from sort of impressionist composers. There's a pastoral element to what they do, which to me isn't entirely the English aesthetic, but it's in there for me. And some of the tracks on this album, especially the sort of ethereal flute melodies, remind me of the English countryside, and that really makes something sound proggy to me. It contains Sylvia, which is you can hear with that opening riff that, you know, that they are trying to create another Hocus Pocus, but this is like Hocus Pocus, but with this incredible tune. They are so good at writing tune. This is full of incredible tunes. I don't know what more I can say about this album. I think it really is one of the greatest progressive rock albums ever made. It vies for being, you know, Focus's greatest album, this and Moving Waves, you know. I think they're at the peak of their powers at this point. And for Moving Waves, they've just tightened up what they do. This is 1973 when, you know, prog bands really knew what they were doing. This is the golden era, and this is one of the great albums from that year, which is like, you know, so we're coming up to celebrating this album's 50th anniversary. Right, so the next album that I've got at number 3 is Uncle Meat by Frank Zappa, which of course now I realise is earlier than third. This is just an astonishing album, so important to the history of progressive rock. But I nearly put Freak Out in. But I think Uncle Meat is just epic, and I think it's just so much more proggy. When I listen to Freak Out, and I actually put most of the songs on, they are psychedelic, whimsical, anti-authority pop songs. You know, Zappa's doing a certain thing, and the way it's stitched over the double album and the conceptual continuity, and then that great big epic at the end, a sort of avant-garde noise epic at the end. That makes the album feel proggy. Uncle Meat is a progressive rock album. It's a progressive rock album before progressive rock exists. It's one of the most important albums in the history of progressive rock. He does everything on this album. He fuses rock with classical music. He creates long epics. He has jazz improvisation there, electronic experimentation, quirky songwriting, non-pop song, you know, subject matter. It's an absolute masterpiece. I think I've spoken about Frank Zappa so much on this channel that I will move on, but that's what I've got. Number 3 is Uncle Meat, right? At number 2, I have Tales from Topographic Oceans. It was number 1 until I sat down and did the list. I just dropped it down to number 2. Again, I've spoken about this album, and I think for the sake of this video, I'm not going to go on about this album here. I think I'm going to follow this video up with a discussion of the 2 albums at the top of this list, because I think they need a separate discussion. So at number 2 I have Tales from Topographic Oceans. Yes, his absolute epic masterpiece from 1973 that some people think they maybe overreach themselves perhaps on this album, that this album somehow in certain places has a little bit of filler in, you know. That you know, Rick Wakeman famously said it would have made a great single album. You know, maybe there's 3 sides of material on here. I used to think like that. My opinion's changing a little bit, and I might discuss this on another video, I think, because we're going to be here for hours, and I know people who watch these lists, they're just sat there waiting to see what I say next, and I'm trying to keep this video pretty short. And at number 1 I have Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. And again, much that we could say about Tales from Topographic Oceans, we could say about this album, and I think it needs a separate video to discuss. You know, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, again, is Genesis at the peak of their powers, making this huge epic in 1973 when prog's at its peak. They have changed their sound. That sort of whimsical Englishness has given way slightly to a sort of Americanization, you know, and especially in the subject matter, which is this sort of surreal American story, which is told across, you know, the album. Some people feel again that there's probably 3 sides of brilliant material and it sags in certain places. I'm not so sure, and I'm going to discuss that on another video, I think. But anyway, that's my list. That is my top 10 progressive rock double albums. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more, wait around for the other videos, like, subscribe, and if you want to support me, become a patron. Thanks for watching.